The ability to connect to a database and display the results is probably one of the most compelling reasons for learning PHP, and working with the database is what this chapter is all about. Throughout the chapter, we'll be working with the Mixed Arrangements page in the Hansel and Petal site. It currently contains 24 small images with accompanying captions that are hard-coded into the HTML. Clicking one of the images loads a dummy page for a description of the flower arrangement. By the end of this chapter, we'll have converted both pages so they draw content from a database. The database system that we'll be using is MySQL, which its website describes as the world's most popular open-source database. And no wonder, it's powerful and relatively easy to use, and is widely used in combination with PHP. It's the default database system most hosting companies provide with PHP. The built-in PHP functions that we'll be using in this chapter are designed to work exclusively with MySQL, but PHP is capable of working with a wide range of other databases. Consult this page in the PHP online documentation if you're interested in working with another database. But the rest of this chapter assumes you're using MySQL. And the first stage is to build the database table and import the data. It's a simple operation that involves little more than loading a file into MySQL. Working directly with MySQL at the command line can be rather daunting, so most people use a front-end tool such as this one, PHP It's a web-based interface that's automatically installed by most all-in-one PHP MySQL packages, including XAMPP, MAMP, and WAMP. If you're using a different front-end, you'll need to adapt the following instructions. So let's create a new database for this project. You can use an existing database if you prefer, as long as it doesn't have a table called arrangements. So in the home page of PHP click the Databases tab, and then in Create Database, type Hansel and Petal. And that needs to be all one word. There should be no spaces in there. You can leave collation as it is, and then just click Create. And that's created our database. So we need to select that database. Hansel and Petal, we can just click that link that's appeared there, jumps to the database, and there are no tables in the database. The table that we're going to use will be created automatically by an SQL file that I've created. So we need to go to the Import tab, click that, and then browse your computer, choose File, click that button, and we need to go to the H&P_check folder. So let's find that. I've got it in my XAMPP folder and in htdocs. Of course, the location might be different where you are. H&P check, and then the 06_01 folder, arrangements.sql. Select that, click Open, and then down at the very bottom, click the Go button. Import has successfully finished. Click Structure. We can see that there is now a table called Arrangements, and if we click Browse, we can see what's in our database. So we've now got a database table to work with, but you also need a MySQL user account that's capable of accessing the Hansel and Petal database. If you're using your own existing database, you can use the existing user account, but for the purpose of this course, I'm going to create a new user account. So click the Home button for PHP and then click the Users tab at the top. Then in Users, Add User, and the username, I'm going to call it PHP Web Des, and then Host, select Local from the Host little menu there, and the password, I'm going to use a really simple one, Linda, all lowercase. And you need to retype the password, and then go all the way down to the bottom. On the right-hand side, there is a Go button. Click Go. And we've added a new user, but we need to give the user some privileges. So there is the PHP Web Des user. Click Edit Privileges. And we ignore this first set of options here because that would give access to all the databases on the server. We don't want to do that. Down at the bottom is add privileges on the following database. And if you open that little menu, you should be able to find Hansel and Petal. And that gives us the privileges for this particular database. And all we need are select privileges. Once you've done that, click Go. And that completes the setup for the rest of this chapter. You're now ready to connect to a database using PHP. When connecting to MySQL with PHP, you need to be aware you have a choice of options. This page in the PHP documentation explains that PHP offers 3 different APIs to connect to a MySQL database: MySQL, MySQLi, and PDO. If you're not familiar with the term API, it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it simply means a set of functions. So which should you use? Well, the choice is made simpler by the fact that the old MySQL extension has been deprecated and will be removed from a future version of PHP. So it says down here it's recommended to use either the MySQLi or the PDO_MySQL extensions. It's not recommended to use the old MySQL extension. The advantage of PDO is that it's designed to work with a wide range of database systems. So in theory, at least, you could later switch from MySQL to Microsoft SQL Server. However, it's not quite so straightforward because of subtle variations in the query language used by different database systems. The advantage of MySQLi is that it's designed specifically to work with MySQL. So that's the one we're going to use. You must be aware, though, that the 3 APIs are mutually incompatible. The old MySQL extension was very popular, and you'll still find a lot of tutorials that use it. Be careful not to mix the old functions with MySQLi. So let's get to work. Let's go to our editing program. And in the Hansel and Petal site, we need to open the mixed folder, and it's mixed.php that we'll be working with. So if we open that page, and what we need to do is to create a connection to MySQL, and we'll create a PHP block above the doc type. And when we connect to MySQL, we need to make sure that we actually do get a correct connection, or if there are any errors. So I'm going to create a variable to store any messages that come from MySQL. So we'll call it message. And it will just be an empty string. So message at the moment contains nothing. There are 2 different ways of writing MySQLi code. What's known as the procedural style was designed to make it easy to rewrite existing code originally created using the old MySQL extension. The object-oriented style is the recommended style for new scripts. It also involves less typing. So in my book, that makes it a definite plus, and that's what we're going to use. So let's create a variable for our database connection, $db equals, and then we need new, which is a keyword, and then MySQLi. It's typed like that by PHP and by Dreamweaver, but it's actually case insensitive, so it doesn't matter which one you use. And then we need to add a bunch of arguments after that. The first argument is the address of the server, which must be a string. And our server is localhost. And very often when you're connecting to your remote server, it's also localhost because it's local on that particular server. Then a comma. The next argument is the user account. And the user account that I'm using is PHP Web Des. The third argument is the password. I spelt Linda all with lowercase, and then the name of the database that you want to connect to. And in our case, it's Hansel and Petal. So those are all the arguments you need, clothing parenthesis, and then a semicolon. So what we need to do is to check whether we've actually connected successfully. So we create a little if-else block here. If, then db, which is our connection. Then we need to have a little arrow, which is an hyphen followed by a greater than sign. And then what we want is connect underscore error. So if there is an error, what we want to do is to assign the value of that error to our message. And if there is no error, the message will be connection is okay. And we will keep our fingers crossed that the connection will be okay. Now, of course, we need to display the message somewhere, and I'm going to scroll quite a long way down, and it will be just before this page open, div class page open. So that's on line 4849. Add a new PHP block there. And we're going to use a truthy or falsy condition if message. Now, message was originally an empty string. So if there is nothing in the message, then this will be ignored. Now, there will be something in the message, but later on we'll be using this to display a message only if there's a problem. Right, so let's have our little block there. And inside that we want to do echo and then double quoted string h2 and then message, a closing h2 tag. And then, of course, we need to have a closing PHP tag, otherwise we've got lots of syntax errors. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to connect to the database, and if there's an error message, we'll get that error message. If connection is okay, we should see connection is okay in that H2. So let's save that, go to our browser, and we need to go to localhost / Hansel and Petal. We can go to the home page and then to mixed arrangements. Load that. Success. Connection is okay. Whee! We have connected successfully to the browser. Now, of course, some people might have problems. So let's go back and create a deliberate error. Let's go back to the editing program. And at the top here, let's spell Linda incorrectly. And then try to reconnect to our database. And we've got a big bad message up at the top here, a warning, access denied for user at localhost using password yes. And it puts the same down here, using password yes. When you get this type of error message, it means that either that particular user doesn't have access to the database, or you've got something wrong in the username or the password. As we saw, I misspelt the password, so it denied the access to the database. So let's go back, make sure that we've got the correct spelling of the password, and reload. Connection is okay. So that means we're now successfully connected to our database, and we're ready to start querying the database to display the material in our web page. After successfully making a connection to MySQL, you can query the database and display the results. Database queries are written in structured query language, SQL, which is often also pronounced SQL. SQL is a vast subject, but in this course, we'll use just a couple of very simple queries. If you want to know more about SQL, there are several courses on lynda.com, including SQL Essential Training with Bill Weinman. Now we're going to put our query here in this else block, but before doing that, let's take a look at the structure of the database that we're working with. So I'm going to switch to my browser and PHPMyAdmin. I'm going to select the Hansel and Petal site, and then I'm going to browse the arrangements table. Now at the top here is actually something very useful. This is the SQL that has been used to get all the details from the table. It's convention in SQL to put keywords in uppercase, so select asterisk is all columns from and then the name of the table. We don't need to worry about this limit 0,30 at the bottom. We won't be using that because we want everything in the table. And if we look at the structure of the table, what we've got in there in each row is an ID for each element, the image name, the alternate text, the title, the price, and the description. And the description has been stored as HTML inside the database. So that's what we're going to have to put into our mixed.php page. So let's go back to that page. And we no longer need this message here. We're going to put our query here and store it in a variable called the variable SQL. And then if you remember what we saw in PHPMyAdmin, it's select and then an asterisk from, and then the name of the table. Then we need to pass that to MySQL using the query method and store the result. We'll store the result in a variable called result. And then we use our DB connector, then arrow and query as the argument to query that SQL variable. And that's all you need to do to query the database. But there might be an error. So let's check if there's an error. If, and then we use DB arrow error. And that will give us an error message. And we need to store that in our message variable. So that's the creation of the database query. That bit is fairly simple, but the original HTML structure of this page means we need to work out very carefully how to display the results. So let's go down and have a look at the page itself. And all of the small images are inside this div with the class page open. And inside that page div, there are 6 further divs, and they've all got the class section. We need only one of them because we're going to be using a loop. So let's just scroll down past that first section and find the next one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use Dreamweaver's select parent tag little function there to select the whole div, delete that, do the same until I've got rid of all the excess divs, being left with only one section div. And I'm going to leave those blank lines here for a moment because that tells me where the closing tag of the page div is. It's down here. What we want to do is, if there's an error, we'll display it in this if block, but if there is no error, we want to go ahead and display the page. So we need to put the page div in an else block. There's the opening curly brace of the else block, and that's why I left those lines down there. So it makes it easier to find. There is the closing curly brace of our else block, and let's remind ourselves of what it is with a comment. So we can now get rid of those. Now there is the section. One little problem with that is that it's got 4 list items inside an unordered list. What we're going to do is to put the section into a loop. And each time you go through the results from the database, you get only one row. So if I use all those 4 list items, we'll end up with the same item being repeated 4 times. So let's get rid of 3 of the list items, leaving just 1. So the next stage is going to be working out how to display everything. But let's just check to see whether we've got any errors in our SQL. So save the page. And if we go to the browser and we need to load the mixed arrangements page and refresh that, we've now got 1 item left in our page. The fact that that item is being displayed tells us that there was no error with our database connection. If there had been an error, we would have seen that error message. Let's just artificially put an error in there. Let's go up there and change the name of the table, resave that and refresh. And now it says table Hansel and Petal arrangement doesn't exist. And the section is not being shown. So that is working absolutely brilliantly. Let's go back, make sure that we correct the name and save the page. And then the next stage will be to display the results from the database.